Hi, my name is Elian Alkuri, and my research explores how specific musical characteristics in Chopin's work, specifically Fantasy Improp 2, can reduce stress and positively impact emotional well-being. Who is Chopin? What is subclinical anxiety? What is rubato dynamics? Count down these next 15 minutes because you're about to find out what this means and why it matters. Today, more people than ever are experiencing subclinical anxiety. Over 30% of teens report by the Mayo Clinic in 2022 that subclinical anxiety is on the rise, and it means that they are anxious but do not meet the criteria to have a diagnosis for anxiety. And so this includes a medication availability that is low for people that do not fit the requirement for anxiety. Furthermore, with music therapy being accessible to a high extent and a growing research on correlations between anxiety and music therapy has been growing. And furthermore, in this mental health crisis, music therapy is gaining traction as a low risk and accessible intervention, but most studies treat classical music as monolith, simply labeling it as calming and without explaining why or how it works. So moving on to the different sources that I undertook, starting off with Matt Judah from Old Dominion University. He studies individuals with high social anxiety and found that they often experience an increase in heart rate as they become more stressed. So this stress indicator is connected to my study because I made sure to include how an increased heart rate would lead to more stress. Furthermore, Stewart from Duke University describes how music activates emotional arousal, and this means that music is not just what we hear, it's how we feel it. And so this connects to my study because it supports how music affects both the mood and the body. Furthermore, music therapy from Mayo Clinic describes how music therapy reduces heart rates, and especially in lowering cortisol levels and helping with emotional regulation. While we endorse music in general, they don't explore how specific musical traits or composers might be more effective than others. That's where my research builds on this topic. It also reinforces Judah's findings that increased heart rate is due to stress. Before we get into what I think about this topic, there's 5 main characteristics in Chopin's music. Rosenblum from Harvard University describes these 5 characteristics as being super influential in his music. Starting off with rubato, that's when the performer slightly bends, slows up, or speeds down the music to make sure that there's an emotional response. Furthermore, dynamics are changes in volume, like sudden soft or loud moments that can surprise the listener or make them feel like there's an intense, emphasized note. Furthermore, percussive traits are sharp or accented attacks on the keys. Even though Chopin's music is lyrical, he uses these moments to build tension before the release. Furthermore, pedaling allows the pianist to blend notes and together to create a warm and soothed sound, and this is what makes Chopin's music feel so dreamy and flowy. And finally, Romanticism is the musical movement Chopin belonged to. It's pretty much when all Romantic era composers emphasized emotional expression in their music, and a big part of this was called modulation, which is when a piece of music shifts from a major to a minor key or vice versa. These elements are what makes his music feel like a story and not just a piece. Now, where my gap fit was exploring all these correlations. So while composers like Mozart and Beethoven have been studied for therapeutic use, Chopin, whose style includes rubato, dynamics, and pedaling, hasn't received the same attention. As Judah describes anxiety to heart rate, Fertilla music to emotion, and Stewart from music to emotion as well, all of these encompass one big gap, which is Chopin's music specifically and how it relates to subclinical anxiety. So this leads to my question: how do specific characteristics of Chopin's music style influence individual well-being, particularly in relation to subclinical anxiety and stress? I hypothesize that Chopin's musical style, specifically his 5 musical traits, remedies stress and improves the well-being of individuals. For the mixed methods methodology, I undertook a study and an interview. For the specific steps I took, I began by recruiting as many people as I can, and I went and removed certain people that did not fit the requirements of my study. This led to 30 participants and a 30 sample size. After, there was a listening sessions at heart rates of 5 key intervals. And at those intervals, there was a before and after heart rate that was measured, which undertook a t-test and created my p-value. And furthermore, they specifically listened to the fantasy impromptu. After that, 20% of participants with a very interesting trend in their heart rates undertook the qualitative data part, which is the interview. And this created a thematic analysis where I created the coding to the traits. More specifically, my quantitative data represented the heart rate trends, which focused on physiological effects, while my qualitative data represents the emotion, which undergone through the interview and provides a framework to analysis and compose music. Furthermore, this incorporation of both a quantitative and a qualitative phase provides a holistic approach to creating an emotional effect on the music. For the quantitative data, I underwent participant filtering. 30 participants aged 14 to 18, that was the scope, people who were teenagers in high school. And they listened to Chopin's Fantasy Impromptu, specifically this piece because it encompassed all 5 traits that I analyzed earlier. It conducted recruitment forms to exclude those with diagnosed anxiety and classical music training. This is the scope of my study. Around 20% of people who filled out the recruitment form were removed from the study to create a sample size of 30 to create a limit variability in how much the trends will change. Furthermore, a standardized time of day was used at 12 o'clock at noon, and noise canceling headphones, as well as the Apple Watch, were used to collect heart rates. As Kushal from Emory University states, the Apple Watch is actually very accurate in collecting heart rates and uses the health app on the Apple company to collect the data. And they actually create their own charts, which was really helpful in my study. This is very replicable in that it's feasible and that anyone with Apple Watch, it's really interactive and it's able to be used around, like almost everyone here has one. So it was really helpful in creating a very participant-friendly study. Furthermore, after I collected all my heart rates, I coded colors. So green represents a increase in tempo, while red represents a lyrical section. Here is what a technical moment included, and this would show an increased heart rate, while a lyrical moment would be a slower heart rate. This is an example of what the participants listened to and how I collected my data procedures. So for qualitative data, after that, 20% of the participants, leading to a sample size of 6 people, were chosen for an interview process. They were voluntarily completed consent forms, and a thematic analysis on their heart rate trends was conducted. And so code words and phrases were assigned, which is what well-being press recommended to do. And this is replicable because it's feasible in how there was a general downward trend in the slope. And so people with qualitative data, anyone could listen to this piece around the world and undergo the same interview because the questions were pretty general. Now for results and findings. Starting off, this is the big chart I had. It included 30 participants and everyone's heart rate. And as you can see, there was dips and spikes. After that, I created an average timeline. And so this is what the average participant was looking at to have the trend. So at 3.21, that was the biggest dip, and that was accompanied with a modulation, which is in one of the characteristics I talked about earlier. It pretty much, that's where the piece went from a minor, which is a sad part of the song, to a major part, which is happy. And so that made everyone's heart rate go down, which was accompanied with a relaxation feeling. Furthermore, the fast parts would increase the heart rate, and that would make them feel a little bit more on their toes or anticipating something next to happen. This goes back and qualifies my 5 traits with the dips during rubato, which is the slower parts, and the spikes during percussive traits, which is the music that Chopin wanted to emphasize. Furthermore, I collected the average heart rate before and after, and with 82.56 beats per minute and then 79.67 beats per minute. And I conducted a t-test with a p-value of 0.000242 p-value. That's very highly significant, and due to a high sample size, less than 0.003% probability that the drop occurred randomly. Almost everyone's heart rate went down, and that just showed how relaxing his piece was. After that, participants described feelings of relief, calm, and even nostalgia. One noted that the pedaling effect made them feel like they were floating, and another said that the romantic dynamics reminded them of a comforting memory. These comments show the deep emotional engagement elicited by the piece. And from the interviews, I extracted themes like emotional release, enhanced presence, and physical relaxation, and these were tied to the specific characteristics. The presence of rubato in particular came up frequently as a calming theme. This is a chart of all the times that a participant responded with the specific word that corresponded with the trait. 5 out of 6 responded with rubato, which is something that they felt. So these are a shared qualitative reflection that directly correlated with the quantitative data. So it reinforced with each other. Now, connecting to previous research and placing my work in the conversation with scholars. These are the individual heart rate graphs where each person reacted slightly differently. Here's where things get exciting. The moment participants' heart rates dropped often aligned with moments they felt as beautiful or moving. This cross-validation of data with Judah and Watkins's sources reflects the idea that specific musical traits, not just the genre, are key to stress relief. For example, Judah describes how music therapy reduced cortisol in stressed individuals, and this is something that I found in my study. Furthermore, Watkins described how there's an emotion to anxiety where rubato in classical music enhances emotional regulation. This is also something that correlated with my qualitative data. Now, for ethical considerations, throughout the study, I made sure all participants can withdraw from the study at any time, all participants signed a consent form, and all data was stored securely and ensured compliance with HIPAA regulations. My study had limitations though. A small sample size, a lack of musical diversity, and no control group. These are just areas that future researchers could address by comparing different composers or expanding to clinical populations. Specifically, the Apple Watch was one of my weakest limitations, but I did back it up on the fact that it is accurate and that it is with the Apple company. Also, with qualitative responses, that will be a little bit subjective with nature. And so while the results were compelling, such limitations are subjective. However, the qualitative data does provide rich insight. And for the next steps and implications, despite these limits, my findings show that Chopin's music, particularly Fantasy Improp 2, has real potential in music therapy. Chopin as a stress relief tool can be used in the future, and opportunities for music-based interventions for free, because it's found everywhere around the world, is possible. For future researchers, larger sample size must be used, clinical settings, and EEG instruments that collect more accurate heart rate data should be used. Despite these limitations, my study suggests that Chopin's music, rubato, and expressive techniques could serve as a stress relief tool. Before we end, I wanted to let you know that Chopin doesn't just compose music, he creates psychological dialogue. To leave you off, I wanted to ask you a question. What if music therapy didn't just calm you, but helped you process everything you feel instead? Listen to Chopin to feel a stress relief. Yeah, that's my work study.
Thank you so much, Elian. All right, I'm going to ask you a series of questions now, okay? All right. Elian, how did you determine which results gathered by your research method were most important in informing your new understanding?
So, as you saw by my qualitative data in the graphs, I looked for the heart rate dips and spikes. The heart rate dips represented a slower heart rate, and an increase would represent increased heart rate. And so with that, I reinforced it with my qualitative data. So with the recrossing from qualitative to quantitative data, I was able to create a holistic approach, and as well as a reinforcing correlation between the two. So by looking at the graphs and analyzing what I saw from the participants and how they felt, that's how I was able to create my results.
Okay, thank you. All right, second question. How do your findings provide directions for future research in the field?
So with the understanding that there are specific composers that have an effect on an individual, they can take that and listen to different artists. Like for example, I was thinking indie bands or pop bands that were able to have an emotional effect on participants. Furthermore, for future researchers, they are recommended to use more accurate EEG instruments, as well as analyzing the cortisol levels, because that also indicates stress. Other biometric analysis variables, because that is very influential in how an individual reacts.
Thank you so much. All right, second and final question here, okay? How did your expert advisor facilitate your deeper understanding of this research process?
So my expert advisor was Dr. Rafa Mrej from St. Jude's Research Hospital, and she advised to pick a piece that used all 5 characteristics from Chopin's music style. So specifically, she really emphasized romanticism because it talks about modulation, which is something that's super specific to Chopin. And with that, she wanted me to be confident about my results, and also if my hypothesis was not going to fit, she really just reinforced just positive attitude.
Okay, thank you so much.